religion of Islam, in resisting criticism. Individuals within Islam who dissent are regarded as heretics, apostates, and they are banished. Individuals from outside of Islam who point to 7 uncomfortable truths about Islam are declared Islamophobic. We expressed our shock and horror at the actions of ISIS. But we remained undecided, and we remain undecided. We have been moved to action by the graphic beheadings on YouTube of James Foley and Steve Sotloff, fellow Americans. We are now acknowledging that these atrocities that revolt us to our very core have something to do with Islam.
That was Ayaan Hirsi Ali speaking at Yale University tonight, just an hour and a half ago, over the protests of some Muslim groups and talking about the recent controversy over ISIS and whether they can fairly be described as Islamic. Joining me now, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who is the president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. Doctor, good to see you tonight. And so she spoke specifically about these atrocities that we are seeing with ISIS, saying they do have something to do with Islam. But as she points out, and she's been an outspoken critic of Islam and its more radical wing in particular, when you go there, you risk being called an Islamophobe.
Yeah, and this is the reality, is that she's been courageous enough and brave enough to confront the reality which Muslims should be doing. And those, you know, I disagree with her about Islam, but this is the battle that we're fighting. And anyone, including our president, who has found himself to be the excommunicator-in-chief, or I call him, you know, now the enabler-in-chief, where he's enabling Islamists. And you mentioned some Muslim groups, Megan. Those are the Islamist groups, because they want nothing more than to suppress the voices of reform. And if you talk to reformers, they will tell you that the Islamic State in Iraq now, or out of Syria where it originated, is a clinic in exactly what happens in every one of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation states, where you mix religion and state and prevent the reforms that the West went through in the American Revolution.
Let me stop you there. What's the difference between the Islamists and the moderate, the reformers?
Well, the reformers don't want Islamism. They don't want Sharia and government. They don't want the clerics telling us that our rights come from them, but rather directly through God. And just as Jefferson created and others the Establishment Clause, us reformers want to separate out the Islamist state and destroy not only the Islamic State, but all Islamic states.
Okay, but let me ask you this, because the president seems to think that by calling, you know, what he said was ISIS is not Islamic, you know, and I had a guest from CARE on the other night who was saying they're no more, you know, Islamic than the Westboro Baptist Church is Baptist.
Well, I'm sorry that, you know, he's ignoring, and this is Hassan Shibli, who we know has been an apologist for Islamism across the planet. They ignore the way Muslims are treated, non-Muslims in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in Sudan, and Iran. How many hundreds of millions of persecuted people do you need under the doctrine of their Islam? Maybe it's not our Islam, but if the American public, if the West, if the free world wants to drive and fuel reform, which is the Cold War of the 21st century, if we're going to drive Muslims to finally wake up, you only do that by saying, you know, this is a problem that Muslims need to fix. And if you take away the word Islam, you're basically allowing the Islamists to monopolize and suffocate reformers from ever having a place at the table, because they don't want us to have a voice. And they do that by saying they control what is and what is not Islam.
Well, what's the story with CARE? Because they come on and they purport to be sort of reasonable, this reasonable voice, but then you read what they put out online, and it's hateful, and they've tried to silence Ayaan Hirsi Ali many times, and that guy, Hassan Shilby, went online after his appearance on the Kelly File and started to say our viewers are worse than ISIS, the beheaders.
Well, I hope Americans understand CARE is part of a global lobbying operation of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, an Islamist movement that will do anything to prevent discussion about political Islam. They're an offshoot of Hamas. They've come out of the Muslim Brotherhood legacy groups. They don't want Americans to make the logical conclusion that when the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt, the reason the majority of Muslims rejected them was they were about to bring something similar to ISIS to the tens of millions of Egypt, to the hundreds of millions around the world, and the Saudi Arabian government does the same thing through Wahhabism. The Iranians do. They don't want that debate, so they label even Muslims, devout Muslims like me, they call us Islamophobes, etc., because they exploit American vulnerabilities about being politically correct, etc., and they prevent the debate we need to have within the House of Islam for reform. And if you want to engage reformers, you have to marginalize them.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, good to see you, sir.